Hello. The goal of this video is to help you understand hand ranges and how this affects your post-flop strategy. The content of this video covers which type of hands each part of your range should consist of, goals for different part of your range, different type of ranges, and thought processes for gameplay. When you look at the range, you have the top, the middle, and the bottom, and of course different level of these. You have the very top of your range, for example, and you have the lower end of your top range. But let's keep it simple for now and look at top, middle, and bottom. The top of your range consists of hands with a lot of equity versus your opponent's range. This includes both made hands and some very strong draws, such as an open-ended straight and flush draw. The middle part of your range will consist of medium amount of equity hands, and this includes hands with showdown value, hands that you bet for thin value with, or you bet for protection as well, draws with some showdown value or medium strength draws, and some bluff catches as well, which usually is medium strength top pairs or some very strong second pairs. The bottom of your range will be hands with little to no equity. This includes hands that you should either fold or bluff with. Now let's look at how you want to play different parts of your range. The top of your range you want to play to get paid, or in other words, play for value. In order to play any hand for value, you need to make sure that you're an equity favorite against your opponent's range. This is where it becomes very relevant to select the right types of hands that you open raise with, pre-raise with, or in any way enter a pot with pre-flop. It's also where it becomes important to adapt your range to your opponent's tendencies. Secondly, you want to make sure that you can get action with the top of your range against the middle or the bottom of your opponent's range. If you think about it this way, if you're only re-raising or playing your hand aggressively when you have a hand from the top of your range, it will be very easy for your opponent to realize this and only continue against you when he is also on the top of his range. If you play this way, anytime you get it all in with a strong hand, you will be up against another strong hand and you won't be very big of an equity favorite. So, how do you make sure that your opponent is forced to try and call you with any other part of his range rather than the top? Well, you can confuse him by playing bluffs or some bluffs the same way you play the top of your range. This way, your opponent is forced to bluff catch with the middle part of his range to some frequency because he's not sure if you're playing the top of your range or the bottom of your range. It's also where it becomes relevant to have an appropriate balance between the ratio of value hands and bluffs. It's also very important when you play the top of your range to maximize your profit. What this means is that you want to make sure that you can get as much money into the pot as possible. When you play the middle part of your range, the main goal is to try and realize the equity of your hands. You do this by controlling the pot size, trying to get the showdown. You turn some of your hands into bluff catchers, or when they're too weak to bluff catch with, you can also turn them into a bluff, but there will also be cases where you just have to fold your hand, especially when you realize that you're up against the top of your opponent's range and you know that he doesn't have a lot of bluff combinations in his range. So, how do you play the bottom of your range? Well, it's pretty simple really. You either fold or you bluff. The question is, which hands do you fold and which do you bluff? Well, you bluff with the best of the worst, meaning the part of your bottom range that has equity, blockers, and or where you have any reads to your opponent. Otherwise, you fold your hand. There are different types of ranges. One type of range is a polarized range. This means that you're playing hands for value from the top of your range and from the bottom of your range. This is common to have on turn and river bets as well as in re-raised pots, which makes sense. If you have a mediocre hand on the turn, you usually want to go for pot control, so you usually check the turn and then reevaluate on the river. The same thing goes in a re-raised pot. You usually either re-raise for value with a very strong hand, or you do it with a bluff. But there are some cases where you, for example, re-raise against a weaker player with a marginal hand because you know his range is so wide. This is where you play a depolarized range. You don't really want to bluff a very loose player because he will never really fold to your bluffs. So instead of having bluffs in your range there, you can add a lot more hands from value from the middle part of your range. A depolarized range is also common when you have a so-called capped range. For example, if your opponent bets the flop and you call in a spot where you would always raise with the top of your range, there you've capped your range and your opponent might be aware of this, so it's important to pay attention where you or whenever your opponent plays a capped range. A merged range is a range consisting of the top, the middle, and the bottom, or in another way, it's not filtered out in any way. This is more common on flop bets. For example, say the flop is ace 5-5 rainbow. This is a flop where you would bet the top of your range, except for pocket aces and pocket fives, perhaps. You will bet the middle of your range, and you will bet with your bluffs. Let's look at some thought processes for gameplay which can help you understand ranges quick. First of all, it's good to think that which part of my range does this hand belong to? That will help you understand how do I best play this part of my range versus this opponent. So if you're on the top of your range, you know, okay, this opponent is loose, he's passive, I want to get the money in here, I need to bet large and I need to bet 3 streets for value. It's also important to consider what's your perceived range. This will help you adapt your strategy depending on how your opponent perceives the strength of your range. When you bet, it's also important to consider which hands in your opponent's range you're targeting. This will help you understand when it's valid to make a certain play or when it's not. If you fail to identify a decent number of hands in your opponent's range that you're targeting with your play, it's probably best not to continue with that play. If you're looking to more advanced concepts, you can also consider what your opponent's understanding is of his own perceived range. But I'm not going to get into that further now. That's all from me in this first video about post-flop strategy. In the coming videos, we'll look at specific ways to playing different part of your range. We'll look at examples from hands that I've played at Party Poker. I hope you continue watching the videos, and I wish you best of luck at the tables. Bye bye.